Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Panel 4, the Higher Education Horizon. Please welcome the President of Eureka College, Dr. Jamel Wright.
Good afternoon. I am the proud 27th president of President Ronald Reagan's alma mater, Eureka College, located in the rural central Illinois calm of our great state of Illinois. It is my pleasure to introduce our next panel, the Higher Education Horizon. As a first-generation college student, the youngest of 5 from a middle-class family in St. Louis, Missouri, college was always discussed as an expectation, not a choice. Of course, this was the early 90s, and college was commonly said to be the path to success. I know that college fostered my desire to be a lifelong learner and has provided me with endless opportunities, like being with you all today as the first woman and African American to serve as president of my and President Reagan's 164-year-old college. I also acknowledge and understand that long gone are the 90s, that a traditional 4-year college is not the path for everyone, or may not be the path immediately after graduating high school. Those of us in higher education are concerned with rising costs. Those of us are concerned with student financial need, with student debt, mental health, post-graduation employment opportunities, time to completion, workforce preparation, and the overall needs of our students, whether traditional or non-traditional. As a president, where 2/3 of my students are first generation, and nearly half qualify for federal and/or state aid, I can assure you that these are some of the things that keep me up at night. RISE is a wonderful opportunity for us to not only gather and discuss the 21st century and future challenges of education some 36 years after A Nation at Risk, but to also identify actionable steps toward overcoming those challenges for the growth and success of our nation. Like K-12, higher education is equally compelled to better understand the complex and multifaceted needs of our communities and workforce, and to move faster and more methodically in addressing those needs. While there is no one-size-fits-all solution, the fact that we need solutions is a foregone conclusion. So I hope you all are as eager as I am to hearing and considering the possible solutions offered by our esteemed panelists. Moderating our panel this afternoon is Ms. Emily Wilkins from Bloomberg Government. And our panelists are the Honorable Jim Banks, U.S. House of Representatives from the state of Indiana, Ms. Chen, a student at Arizona State University, the Honorable Diane Jones, Principal Deputy Undersecretary of the U.S. Department of Education, and Mr. Chok Ooi, co-founder and CEO of Kensi Academy. I thank them in advance for their attention to this very important conversation and ask that you please join me in welcoming them to the stage this afternoon.
Well, thank you everyone so much for being here. This is usually the time of day that I go for my second cup of coffee, so I'm glad that you've all decided to join us. I think this is going to be an excellent panel, both because of our panelists, as well as the fact that higher education, there's so much going on in DC right now with this topic. You have Senator Lamar Alexander and Senator Patty Murray working to reauthorize the higher education law, which hasn't gotten a comprehensive reauthorization in more than a decade. At the same time, the Education Department is in the middle of putting together new regulations for accreditors and colleges. And just the other week, the negotiators on that managed to reach consensus. And if you don't know how big of a deal that is, I was in the room when it happened, and we started hearing all these pops, and Diane Jones was opening up champagne. So it's considered a big deal that they reached consensus on this one. But I sort of wanted to start with one of the questions. I mean, underlying all of this discussion, I think, is a wider question about what the purpose of college is. What role do we want college to play in our society? This morning, Sal Khan with Khan Academy mentioned that college used to be considered a finishing school for the elite. It is certainly not anymore, but I'm wondering if each of you can take a moment and talk about what role you do see college playing today. Representative Banks, do you want to start?
Yes. First and foremost, it is an honor to be on this stage and tackle this subject with you. When I think about what it means to be a Reagan conservative, there's so much that there is to think about when it comes to education policy that I look forward to talking about with you today. It means more flexibility for federal programs, more transparency, pushing more efforts back to the state level for more innovation. And to get to your underlying question, which is the foundational question of all of this, what is the point of a college degree? It's to prepare not just students for the future, but and not just the traditional students who are coming out of high school for the jobs of the future, but it's college and higher education today is a lifelong endeavor, and that's how we have to think about it from a policymaking perspective. We're not just dealing with 18 to 22-year-olds when it comes to higher education. Today we're dealing with individuals in all sets of life, and policymakers need to rethink how they approach higher education policy from that perspective.
This is a very interesting question for me because I am a student right now, and I get to be surrounded by people who are literally asking ourselves the very same question, even though we're right in the middle of it. But for me personally, having gone through it for the past 3 years, really the greatest benefits to me about going to college is being in an environment that was so different from where I grew up. I come from the suburbs of Chicago, and I go to Arizona State University, which means, yes, the weather is very different, but the people are also very different. This is the first time that I get exposed to people who are from different countries, who come from different backgrounds, who faced very different obstacles in their lifetimes, and they all get to come together in this one place to really appreciate the value of knowledge, generation, and learning. And so for me, getting to experience all that, I feel like this is really the greatest opportunity to convene people of different backgrounds, all for the same commonality, and then hopefully to bring forth and advance the different fields that we work within, while simultaneously gaining the general knowledge and leadership development necessary for us to be well-rounded leaders in whatever field we end up going to whenever we graduate. And more so, we're finding that it's going to count. We're going to count a lot more in those kind of generalist skills because technology and everything else is advancing so quickly that eventually we're just going to have to be able to build off of this foundational knowledge in college to be able to have careers that can last into the future.
I think I prefer to think of post-secondary education instead of the word college. College feels so singular to me. It feels as though there is this one focus and we're trying to drive everybody to it. And I think that has been one of the failures, frankly, of higher ed policy in my lifetime in the 30 years is that we have driven everybody to a single solution, and while that solution may be the best solution for many students, it is not the best solution for all students, and yet it seems to be the only one that we have supported as a country, that we've supported with financial aid. So I think we need to understand that post-secondary education offers all kinds of things for all kinds of people. For some individuals, post-secondary education is their first chance to be away from home and to be independent. For others who are adults, it's a second opportunity or a third opportunity to gain job skills or to transition to a new job. For some individuals, it is intellectual gymnastics, right? It's their opportunity to go and think deeply and interact with material that they haven't interacted with before. And yet for others, it's the idea of being in an environment totally different from where they grew up or totally different from what they experienced in high school. So I think of post-secondary education as a comprehensive set of options. We need to make more options available, and I think we need to recognize that everybody comes to post-secondary education with their own goals and their own objectives, and they are not always the same from one student to another. So I would like for us to think about post-secondary ed as a place where we need to create a diversity of options far more than we've done in the past.
I have the exact same view as Diane. I think we need to change the language to say the aspiration is higher education or post-secondary. It's not, that does not mean college is the only option. And I think we as a country over the last few decades over-prioritize college, that we're seeing vocational education as inferior. You know, if your kid goes to vocational schools, your neighbors and family will be questioning what's wrong with them. And that's totally a wrong notion. We really need to change that. I heard a panelist earlier saying about, this whole, starting from the young age, telling them college or bus and all that. We really need to change that conversation to say higher ed or bus. And then, focus on people where there are multiple opportunities in life. And also, it's no longer a single pathway where you go to college and you work until you retire. We need to create on-ramps on multiple points where people could start with a vocational training, vocational education, go get a good job, and then in the future, if they wanted to, go get a bachelor's or something when it's applicable. Vice versa, you could have a bachelor's degree and then do certificate programs to acquire additional skills to make yourself marketable. The workplace over the last decade has changed so much that we really need to start adapting our higher ed to keep up with it if we want to remain competitive as a country.
So kind of pinging off of that, how do we let students and I guess people in general know that they do have these multiple career pathways? It's not just a four-year college, because we do, right? We do have vocational programs out there. We do have training programs out there. We have a wide variety of options for post-secondary or higher education. What needs to be done to make sure that all of these options are clear to all students?
I would say, I think it's starting to happen because a lot of people are starting to question the value of some college programs. And you're seeing, with such a big market, it has, I think, a 25%, 30% satisfaction rate. So there is a problem, and people are starting to realize it. You're seeing that in the news, in the trend. People are starting to see if there are other opportunities out there beyond just a traditional 4 years. I think what we need to do better as a country, if you look at legislation and policy and everything right now, it's very heavily tilted towards in favor of a college program. So that is another place we could address as well, is to level the playing field for other providers as well, whether it's public, nonprofit, for-profit, so that people have true choice when it comes to that. And it's more of, let's focus on the career. What are the careers? What are the jobs of today and the future? And then think backwards as to what are some programs that I could do to get myself there to have a successful career in these new fields.
And I think we have a magic moment in time. Unemployment is so low. Employers are so hungry for employees that we have this magic moment in time to wean people off of college, to wean people off the college degree as the screening tool. And the price of college gives us another opportunity for parents to start thinking more comprehensively about other opportunities that might be available. So I do think we have a magic moment in time that we have to take advantage of. And what I worry most of all, and I think you mentioned this, is the stigmas associated with anything but college. And we as a society have to become much more respectful of people who choose different pathways and people who perhaps delay college until their 30s or their 40s. So we really need to focus on making sure that the incentives are all in the right place. Right now, every incentive points toward college. You're a good charter school if you send people to college. You're a good high school if you send people to college. And I think we need to recognize that we need to have a more diverse set of incentives to recognize success in whatever form it comes.
To build off of that, I think there is Road Trip Nation, I think, is a really good example of leveraging things like storytelling to help normalize some of those alternative pathways. I think right now students sometimes have trouble identifying role models who don't go to college. Like right now within my school, we have a lot of outreach programs that are specifically for even minority students to go on to say it's okay for minority students to come to college, but I'm not sure that there are also programs for community college students to go out and say, oh, it's okay if you also go to community college. Or those who don't go to college at all going in and saying, here was my career path, here were the ways that I found success without having to go to a 4-year program. I think highlighting those people as well, and people who are relatable to them, who look like them, can help them really visualize the ways that they don't have to go this one specific route that has been presented to them multiple times. I think really leveraging a variety of tactics will help with that.
Economically, as you've already heard, the paradigm is shifting whether we like it or not. Mm-hmm. And what I find as a policymaker, as a member of Congress, is that most of these federal programs are tailored in a way to a one-size-fits-all solution. And now it's time for us to catch up, whether it's reforming Pell Grants or student aid programs of all stripes. The complaints that I hear from my constituents is that most of these programs aren't suited to the pathway that they've chosen. So that's what I find the obstacle in front of us as policymakers is figuring out how we reform those programs to make them work for the diversity of the pathways that we have today.
Sure, and I know there's bipartisan support in Congress for opening up Pell Grants to non-degree programs, short-term programs. Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe the Kensi Academy uses federal funding. You guys have an alternative income share agreement method. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, and I'm wondering sort of, number one, if that would work for other schools, and number two, if you would eventually like to see the Kensi Academy their students be able to access Pell Grants to attend. Do you think that would be something that would be beneficial in having students understand that there are more options than a 4-year degree?
Yeah, because today we don't have access to Pell Grants as an institution. Therefore, we try to level the playing field by innovating in different financing models. And I think over the last, especially the last 2 years, the most exciting instrument right now is the income share agreement, or the ISAs. That's getting a lot of interest. And I think Mitch Daniels at Purdue is pretty much at the forefront of pushing this, and I think making it a lot more mainstream. Schools like Kensi use income shares to make our program accessible to students. But what we really like about it is it now aligns the institution's incentives with student outcomes. You can't just say that, as long as I collect the tuition, as a school, I'm giving you an education, you graduate, my job is done. For us, if students don't get a good job and if they don't stay at those jobs, we don't get paid. So we are hyper incentivized to make sure that students are successful at the program. We even act as, I always like to joke that we act as Hollywood agents for our students. We don't just send them to a career center and say, let's help you with your resume, here's how you apply for a job, good luck, and then sign up for the alumni donation on the way out the door. We actually actively find jobs that our students will be successful in, so that they will pay back tuition. And the way it works is that students don't pay tuition up front. When they graduate and get a job and make more than a certain threshold, in our case, since our school is in the Midwest, our threshold is $40,000, which is a pretty good pay in the Midwest. If you don't make more than $40,000 over a period of time, you walk away and you owe us nothing. We as an institution take all the loss. But if you're successful, you pay it forward by contributing a percentage of your income for 4 years. And then that allows us to create a sustainable program to support the next student after them.
And so do you think your program would benefit then if it could be open to receiving federal funding?
Yeah, that would really level the playing field for us, which we would highly welcome. But at the same time, we will also like to see, even if we qualify for a Pell Grant, can there be some accountability? So that we're not, because we don't want to be in a situation where many other players who are not operating in good faith will come in and just say, let's just take the Pell Grant, and now let's forget about outcomes again. How can we make institutions who qualify for Pell Grants are also accountable to outcomes? So that you can really, in this situation, institutions that really produce good outcomes can be successful and grow over time.
I know as far as outcomes go, there's been a lot of talk about skin in the game proposals, about risk sharing, about making sure that there's what, $1.5 trillion in student debt, 40% of students are expected to default within the next however many years. But you've got a situation where people are turning to colleges and saying, well, if all of this is happening to students, what's happening to the institutions? And Diane, I have to pick on you a little bit because I know that the White House has asked the Education Department to look into this. So anything you want to share to make news would be great. But I also want to ask you, because I know that you have an extensive background in higher education, just sort of going off your background and your experience, what you think a viable risk-sharing proposal might be.
So I think we have to be very careful and in thinking about risk sharing, and we have to proceed with caution. And the first thing we need to do to be able to move into a risk-sharing paradigm is we have to stop saying that everybody should go to college, right? So we have set up this impossible situation where on one hand, we've said everybody has to go to college, and many institutions are required by legislation or their mission to take any student who walks in the door. Because we've had an open access, or we've had an access-focused public policy agenda. And then we couple that with the institutions that we say you have to take every student who walks in the door, and then we say, oh, and by the way, you also need to share the risk. And so I think as we think about risk sharing, which certainly has merit, we have to take into account that different students have different opportunities. We know there's a fair amount of research that shows that outcomes are linked largely to parental income, parental education levels. So we have to integrate that into our thinking. But we do have to provide those other options so that students for whom college isn't the best option have some place to go. Right now, college is pretty much the only place they have to go. So we have to be very careful, and I think we talk a lot about looking at value-added models. So not every student's going to have the same outcome, but you have to take into account the starting point of the student and the goal of the student. So we do think a lot about how can you share the risk. We love income share agreements. We're thinking about how we can use the federal programs to do an experiment with income share agreements. But again, I think that can't be a successful paradigm if we still are living in a world where we're telling every student that you can't be successful unless you go to college. So we have to couple risk sharing with the idea that students for whom college isn't the best choice or their perfect choice have something else to do. You know, the worst thing we can do, you know, I taught at a community college for 10 years. Community colleges teach students from all kinds of different backgrounds, and many of whom don't come there because they want a degree. They want a few classes. And we have to be really careful because a risk-sharing model not well designed could really harm community colleges, and they don't have wiggle room. They don't have money to pay fines, and we don't want to see community colleges turning students away. We don't want them to become uber-selective institutions. So it is an important conversation to have, but it is a plan forward that needs very careful thinking and consideration.
I also wanted to ask you guys a little bit about, and I know some people are probably going to hate me for using this term, but non-traditional students. And by that, I just mean the students who are not your fresh-faced 18-year-old high school graduate, mom and dad helped them move into the dorms on their first day. Right. Nothing against those people. I was that person. But I know this includes people who are in their careers and want to advance and need education to do so. It includes people who want to make a career switch. It includes parents. It includes veterans. And so I wanted to sort of discuss a little bit about, are colleges meeting the needs, or I guess post-secondary institutions, meeting the needs of these groups? What are their needs? And I guess what more needs to be done to make sure that college and higher education isn't simply catered to those who are leaving high school?
Mary Eskeby?
Anyone. Oh. Open floor.
Well, I feel that that many institutions do a great job serving some non-traditional students. I think some institutions do a pathetic job serving any non-traditional students, and then I think other institutions are designed specifically for non-traditional students. And so I think we see the full range. But I think to serve a non-traditional student well, you have to really understand what else is going on in their lives. So I taught lots and lots of non-traditional students. When I taught at the community college, my day students were very different than my evening students. And I think we have to look at not just the college experience, but everything else that's going on in their lives. So a simple thing like, if you are a parent and you have managed to get your job schedule changed and your daycare changed so you can take classes on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, that's great until 15 weeks later, you're moving to the next semester, and lo and behold, the school only offers the classes you need on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And now you have to change your job schedule, and you have to find new daycare. So I think programs that are focused on the needs of non-traditional learners oftentimes will have set schedules that kind of guarantee if you come in and this is the schedule you want, we can pretty much make sure you have that schedule all the way through. So I think that there are, and some institutions aren't interested in serving non-traditional students, and I think as long as they're clear, that's fine too. If they're very clear that their mission is for a traditional student, That's fine too, as long as they make it clear and don't try to pretend that they are serving a non-traditional student and then everything on campus is really geared toward the traditional student.
So at Kensi Academy, our school is entirely designed around serving non-traditional students, which we believe over the next few years are going to be the majority of learners. A lot of things that we try to meet our students where they are. So one of the challenges with our students is they cannot afford, many of them cannot afford not to make a paycheck while they're going back to school. The way we solve it is twofold. One is we change our schooling hours so that it creates flexibility time for people to work or take care of a kid or whatever they need to do. But then secondly, we partner with Cali Services, which is one of the largest placement firms in the country, which is also a Kensi investor, to launch a highly scalable earn and learn program. So today, every student enrolled at Kensi, if they want a job, gets a job that is part-time, flexible, and they can even do it from home, that pays well above minimum wage. So we take a lot of students that came from food services and retail that were making minimum wage, and by enrolling in Kensi, now they already have a big bump in pay. And the work is actually, they get trained on technical support, so customer service, a lot of technology stuff, so it's relevant to the training, builds a lot of the soft skills that are required. But it is, how do we design all these things into the school model so that we remove as many barriers as possible to make it possible for students to come back to school, and also shorten the time of the program. Instead of 4 years, Kensi programs are 1 to 2 years in length. So it's long enough for people to acquire the skills, build up, immerse themselves, and be confident in that before they go out job hunting. But you don't need to wait 4 to 6 years now, for a bachelor's program.
There's a lot of anxiety when I meet with leaders in higher education about the higher education marketplace today. Substantial decline in the student population. You have a record number of colleges who are closing their doors. I say we welcome this moment, this disruptive moment in the higher education marketplace, because it's going to create it is creating a disruptive force where institutions are adapting in ways that we haven't seen before. Purdue University acquiring Kaplan, as an example. It's going to be that type of leadership in higher education that's going to create the institutions that survive and take care of the non-traditional students for some time to come. I think that makes this moment, while there is a lot of anxiety, it makes this moment an exciting time for higher education too.
If I may jump in with some kind of student level perspectives, I think coming from a school that has a great mix of non-traditional and traditional students, it's really beneficial for us on a student level to be able to interact with people who are so different from ourselves. I think ASU has some interesting programs, like I'm part of the Public Service Academy, where we are explicitly encouraged to work with our veteran population, our ROTC population. We specifically have our Pat Tillman Center that is specifically for veterans, so that they can build up a community. But I think one aspect that often gets overlooked, and that kind of ties in with the Pat Tillman Center, is that community aspect for non-traditional students. We have a huge online population, and those are mostly non-traditional students, from my understanding, but if those students don't have a community, then they really struggle to stay engaged with the curriculum. They really struggle to stay in school. And I think right now my professors, I've spoken with a few of them, and they all get really confounded when they're like, why aren't these students getting involved with extracurriculars? Why aren't these students being more engaged in their classes? And it's really, I think, meeting them where they're at. They just don't understand the kind of responsibilities these students have outside of their school. If they have a job that they have to go to at the end of the day, they can't go out and just go to these events that are put on for free for these students. It doesn't matter whether there's free food or not. These students have a responsibility. And I think that there is some merit maybe to having more on-campus jobs. Like schools will say, oh, we have these stipended positions, and I'm in one of them. But the fact of the matter is these positions are usually at minimum wage or even lower, because as a stipend position, you don't have to be paid minimum wage. You don't have to be paid hourly. And that is inherently discriminatory to students who could be very strong leaders, who could contribute greatly to the student population. But these students just cannot be given that opportunity because they cannot afford to. And I think those are just some smaller logistical things that happen on a university level that just ultimately make these students feel like they're a little bit ostracized because they can't get involved even if they want to.
So I feel like I'm hearing that non-traditional schools might be a great fit for non-traditional students, but four-year schools aren't going anywhere. Is there something that four-year colleges, you gave some great examples with Arizona State, but other things that four-year schools could really implement to make sure that they are meeting the needs of people who are looking for a second career, for parents, for veterans?
I mean, there are some four-year institutions that have developed really creative and effective solutions, and they're perfectly happy to admit that, their Monday through Friday program is for traditional students, and they have a Saturday program for non-traditional students, or they have an evening program. And some of those institutions will use block scheduling for their non-traditional learners, and that could be very different than what they have during the day for their more traditional learners. So I think we see a lot of four-year institutions that are trying to just acknowledge it's a different student population and we need to have different programs. Other institutions have done a really good job of trying to integrate non-traditional students and traditional. But it sort of depends on what's non-traditional about them. So if it's non-traditional because they're a first generation, but they're still living on campus and going to school full time, then that's one kind of non-traditional student. If it's, a single mom or a single dad with a full-time job and 3 kids at home, that's a very different kind of non-traditional student. And I've seen institutions do wonderful things for those students. But one of the problems is that I don't think that we've done a good job of helping students shop for those amenities. So students have learned how to shop for the amenity of the campus and the dorm and the gym. We used to call them gyms in my day. The physical fitness, whatever we call these today. But I think we haven't done a good job of teaching students to shop for, ask them, do they have childcare? Do they have drop-in childcare? Can you enroll in a program in the evening and complete that program in the evening without the magical surprise in your 3rd semester that, well, but for this one class you have to come during the day? So I think we have to help our adult learners learn how to shop. And then we need to do a pretty good job of having our institutions start making that information available. When I was teaching, every time a student didn't show up for class, I called the student, and 9 times out of 10, for my evening students, this is what I heard. Diane, I worked all day, I raced around the Beltway, I fed my kids, I got them to my mother's house because she can watch them, I raced back around the Beltway, I got to campus, I could not find a parking place anywhere near my classroom. It was the last straw, I packed it up, I drove home. So for an adult learner, parking accessibility can be at the top of their list of needs because they're juggling so many things. And what campus advertises their parking density or their parking availability? So we need to teach students how to shop for the amenity they need, and we need to encourage institutions to make students aware of which amenities they can offer.
Speaking of shopping for college, I feel like this is almost a too-perfect segue into the college scorecard, which I know that the Education Department is currently working to update. And I don't know if you could sort of talk a little bit about that as far as like a brief update of as far as where are you at in that process?
Sure. So the college scorecard, we are in the process of expanding it to provide program-level outcomes. When you look at institution-level outcomes, it can deceive students. So an institution that has a very large engineering program could have a very high average earning, but it could be that their teacher education majors don't make any more than the teacher education majors at another institution that just has fewer engineering majors, right? So when you do institution-level data, earnings data can be driven largely by socioeconomic level of students as well as the distribution of programs. So we are going to break that down and provide program level data so that students can see not only how an institution does compared to maybe they have 3 choices. We want them to be able to compare those 3 or 4 choices, but we also want them to be able to look at the program level. So we will have debt level at the program level, we will have earnings level at the program level. At the institution level, we'll continue to have information about institutional selectivity, institutional type, what is the population, it is an urban institution, et cetera. So we think that having program data will really help students. Now, our goal is not to drive every student to the highest earning major. Our goal is simply to have students understand what's likely in their future. And we think this does 2 things. One, we think that it will help students have a better sense of how much they really can afford to borrow. I think it's very difficult to talk a student out of borrowing when they just have no concept of what that monthly payment's going to look like and what their income is going to look like. But two, we're going to find that there are some very high-value careers, high-value, high societal value, where the earnings are just too low to justify the investment. And I think that's where philanthropy comes in. Perhaps that's where redistribution of other resources. So I don't want to send the message that we think everybody should just, gravitate toward the highest earning majors. We think people should pursue their passion, and we think that people should pursue things that interest them and that they're good at. But it's a good thing to know along the way that if you're picking something that is your passion but maybe doesn't pay such a high wage, then budget appropriately and borrow a little bit less, and or if you are compassionate about people and in that occupation, if you're making donations, make donations, to that program. So we think program level data will be, really helpful. Now it'll have some unintended consequences. We talk a lot about STEM, but the truth of the matter is, computer science engineering have very strong outcomes. Other areas in STEM at the undergraduate level do not have strong outcomes, and it's because in those fields you have to go to graduate school. So we have to be prepared to explain to students that sometimes these numbers can be deceptive, and also if you want to be a biologist or a chemist or a physicist, you need to understand that you're probably going to have to be in for the full term for a PhD. So there could be these unintended consequences. We have to be ready to explain to students how to interpret these data. But we think it's a move in the right direction.
I think this makes a lot of sense because, like, when you buy a car, a house, a TV, like, you have all this information ahead of you. Even if you're taking on a interest payment, what is my monthly payment? But education, which is one of the most expensive, debt you take on in your life, you don't have that transparency. So that makes a lot of sense.
In Indiana, we do. We're one of 12 states that has a debt notification letter mandated at the state level. Which was brought about from a voluntary program that my alma mater, Indiana University, led. And that debt notification letter in Indiana at IU has led to 60 or 31% reduction in the borrowing of students at the in-state tuition levels. So that's a significant state-level led initiative that we have in Indiana that other states should follow as well.
And we're changing our vocabulary at the department. What used to be the shopping sheet is now called the college financing plan, because for most students that's precisely what it is. We're not calling loans aid. We're not calling it a financial aid award if it involves lots of loans. A loan is a loan. And so we have fooled students with our vocabulary, because we talk about a financial aid award letter, and we talk about we use these very friendly terms, but for most students, what's on that list is loans, 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 and more loans. So we want to use the right vocabulary so that students aren't misled that when they're taking a loan, it's not aid necessarily, and it's not an award, it's an obligation. And so we're trying to change our vocabulary to help, for that very reason, to try to encourage students to not borrow the max. I can't tell you how many students tell us that they think they can only borrow the max or nothing at all. So we have to do a lot of work to teach them that, nope, you can borrow anywhere in between.
And going back to the vocabulary a little bit, I actually did a story about student veterans who would go to college, they'd get a big stack of forms, they'd sign them all, not knowing what half of them would say. And although they were verbally told you will not have to take out loans to attend this school, they signed a form that basically led them, there were loans taken out in their name. And Congressman Banks, I know you actually have a bill, I think, that you've introduced that's supposed to sort of cut down on the jargon and be a little more clear and precise with students. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, Representative Cleaver and I, from a bipartisan standpoint, have offered this legislation because of just how arduous all of this is. It reminds me of, most of you probably read Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, right, where he talks about, in his book, about how complicated it was to fill out all the forms. So eventually he said, forget that, I'm going to join the Marines instead, because it was so difficult to go through all the process. And I can relate to that first generation college student myself, going through that process and not knowing what I was doing to begin with, and filling out forms that I didn't understand. And so Representative Cleaver and I have tried to present legislation that would try to make it simpler, make it more transparent, and easier for students to navigate.
One thing we do to address that, so with income share agreements, because it's also so new, we actually make our students take a quiz, that they have to pass the quiz before they qualify for the income share. So in this situation, not only are we giving them information one way, we want to see it articulated back to say that they really know what they're getting into. And I think that has really helped us sort of identify students who didn't really understand what they were going into. And they get to take it the second time, and then the third time we just say, this is not the right instrument for you.
We're retiring the 10-year master promissory note. So students right now, they sign a promissory note and it's for 10 years, and sometimes they don't know that they actually were signing for a loan for many years when they signed. So we're moving back to an annual promissory note. Because of Next Gen financial aid, we have better technology. We'll be able to administer the annual promissory note. So we're not putting additional burden onto institutions. We'll take that burden on, but we are going to link it to some sort of an assessment so that you have to do a few things to make sure that we know that you know what you're signing up for. So we think technology is going to help address some of those things. We know that we need to be the partner in educating students about financial responsibility. We no longer live in a world where we can pat ourselves on the back because we pushed a bunch of money out the door. We need to help educate students.
Do you know when that change will happen?
So the change in the vocabulary is happening right now. The annual master promissory note will depend upon how quickly we can get it rolled out in Next Gen. We would love to see it roll out in the next 2 years. I think at this point in a year it might be difficult to roll it out for next academic year, but hopefully the academic year after that. We may be able to move to an annual promissory note more quickly, but we just don't want to put the burden on the institutions, right? So until the technology is up and running, we would have to have students going back to the financial aid office to sign the form every year. We don't want to put that burden on schools. So it will be in sync with when we can actually push the educational technology and have the electronic signature. So hopefully in the next year or two.
But the idea is to have the technology there so that it's not a burden for students to sign, that it's very easy. Because I know that was the idea behind the 10-year master promissory note. You don't want to cut off aid for students who need it just because they didn't sign a piece of paper.
Right, exactly. So that probably means we'll do a demonstration project the first year to make sure our technology works before we go, expansive.
I also wanted to back up a little bit to a discussion that came up quickly during the college scorecard discussion, which is that students are going to have perhaps a much better idea of what different majors make and sort of how that might impact a student's decision. I know that was a topic that also has come up in regards to college accountability and holding colleges accountable. If colleges find that all of their computer science graduates are paying off their loans just fine, but perhaps not their teacher graduates because you make different amounts of money in those fields, that the college might feel pressure to end education programs and social sciences programs and the journalism program. And I wanted to see if you could sort of address how we might want to think about that going forward to make sure that, especially for teachers and social workers, that colleges aren't pressured to suddenly stop offering those programs because students aren't making as much as their STEM counterparts. I guess that one's for anyone.
I think that's why we have to proceed carefully with risk-sharing models, right? To take into account that we have high-value occupations that are lower-wage occupations. And, I've worked with a lot of students. So, we all sit here in Washington and we look at the numbers and we do the math and we just can't understand why an 18-year-old isn't picking this, why aren't they all engineers? Well, first of all, if they were all engineers, engineering probably wouldn't pay so well. And secondly, engineering isn't appealing to every single student. So I think at the end of the day, most Americans really do pick their occupation based on what motivates them. What do they want to do with their life? What do they want to change in the world? And so while I think they need to know in advance what a salary might look like, I just don't think we're going to have a wholesale shift to every student in college being an engineering major or a computer science major. And let's be honest, not only does every student not want to be in that major, not every student can, right? We each have our gifts, and not everybody is gifted in the skill set. You need to be a computer scientist or an engineer, and that doesn't make your gift less valuable. So we really do need to figure out how to leverage everybody's talent and get out of this mindset that it's only a good job if it's a college job and it pays a six-figure income. So we have to make sure that unintended consequence is not where we end.
I have a slightly different view. I believe that going forward in the future economy, people say every company is a tech company today. Every job somehow will be a tech-enabled job where you are leveraging technology to enhance your work. So the vision I would like to see in the future is like today, almost everyone in many professions know how to use a Microsoft Word, a PowerPoint, and all that. I think we need to evolve to a point where you need to give people some technical skills, like coding skills, which is, and you could be a nurse or someone, and then you could somehow also do some coding work if you need to help solve the problem that are relevant, or understand it enough that you can use the right tools to be successful at your job. So having some of these tangible skills, regardless of whether you're the liberal arts major or biology major, whatever it is, gives you more options in your career.
Something else for colleges to consider is that ultimately AI is already here. And AI will be able to replicate a lot of the stuff that even coders do today. And I think ultimately, as a computer science major, my humanities and liberal arts portion of my education, I think will be more valuable as time goes on. Because really it's about being creative. It's really about enhancing who we are as humans that will ultimately make us future-proof. Because if we're gonna just teach to whatever the current jobs are today, then we're already behind. Because these students aren't just going to be teachers or aren't just going to be nurses. Like, they're gonna be doing so many things on top of what we can predict for today. So even though last year's graduates made me making a certain amount of money, that's for a specific job sector that exists for now, and we'll see where it goes in the future. So I think humanities should not be diminished in any way. Even though STEM has more money in it for now, we don't know where the future is going to be, and we need students who are strong, who are civically engaged, who are good writers, who are good speakers, who can lead in a variety of ways and can adapt their skill sets. And I think going off of Chok's point, like, ultimately, I don't think somebody needs to be a computer science major or I don't think that people have to go into a computer science major to have computer science skill sets. I think the future is going to be able to have those skill sets and adapt it to the fields and the interests that students have. We've spoken earlier today about interest-based education, and I think people are ultimately motivated to go into fields that they are interested in and that they're passionate about. If you're going to go into computer science because you want to make a lot of money, a lot of those people don't stay. Right. And so it's just about taking those tangible technical skills, applying them in ways that people are really interested in, and that's what will be the future. The future is going to be those intersections, not just people who are going to go around just programming because they want money.
I think one example. One concrete example is marketing. I think 10, 15 years ago, before Facebook and Google and everything, marketing was not a STEM subject. But today, with digital marketing, as a digital marketer actually makes a very good living. With our school, we pay some marketers as much as we pay a software engineer. These are like new jobs that are created because of technology and all that. And there will be a lot more new jobs that don't exist today. That will come up over the next few years. And it will be a combination of non-STEM subjects that if you have some sort of technical aptitude or technical skills, you can essentially have access to a lot of these new jobs.
If I could add very quickly, we've got to knock down federal barriers that prevent the states from figuring this out on their own. I guarantee you that Indiana, Governor Holcomb, leaders in my state can solve these problems better than anyone in Washington, D.C., that they can come up with solutions that work in our state. There was one bill Senator Lee introduced last year, I believe it was the HERO Act, that would allow for states to set up their own accrediting bodies so that they had more flexibility to tackle issues like these in higher education. So that's how we have to think about these big issues, is empowering the states to be able to do what they're always going to do better than the federal government.
Absolutely. And kind of going off of that then, the federal government, they are in the process of updating the higher education law. Senator Alexander was here this morning talking about it. Patty Murray is, I think, at this point somewhere in the building, and she's working on it as well. If you guys could have one thing that you could guarantee would be changed with the upcoming reauthorization, whenever it gets done. What would that one thing be?
Just one?
Just one. We're down to 2 minutes and 30 seconds, just one.
Title IV Pell Grants.
I'm going to cheat and have two. Short-term Pell and caps on Parent Plus and Grad Plus loans.
I'm not sure I'm totally prepared to answer that question right now.
Well, Senator Braun and I introduced the short-term Pell flexibility bill this week. And as I listen to policymakers in Indiana and my constituents, that's an area where we can make a big difference by providing a simple solution.
So you guys all answered that way faster than I was expecting you to, which is great. I mean, basically the answer seems to be short-term Pell, thinking about other ways to use Pell. But that does give me a chance, Diana, to go back to you. I did want to ask you, you do go to a traditional four-year school. You are, I think, what's sort of considered a traditional student. But I was looking at your LinkedIn before I came here, and it is loaded with experience. I mean, you worked at Google, you've worked all these other places while you're still a student. And I think it's sort of interesting because I feel like, you are proof that you can do sort of career skills and career training at a four-year college. And I just sort of wanted to see if you could talk about your experience and sort of what you feel in the college allowed you to have that experience where you have gotten to do hands-on work with companies.
Mm-hmm. So my experience with internships and everything else that I went through my professional experience during college started with just putting myself out there and having those opportunities to put myself out there. I started with my first two internships were through companies that did not necessarily have a freshman-specific program, but during my freshman year, second semester, I was able to go into it, and then during the summer after my freshman year, I went to it. So I think it's companies going out there and really taking a chance on people who are younger, who may not be quite as experienced, but can see the potential and the skill sets that we have. Meanwhile, colleges are also preparing the students with the technical skill sets earlier on so that they can go out and apply it to whatever they'd like. And I think I've had a couple of non-traditional opportunities to apply my own skill sets because I was out there looking for ways that I could apply skills within the education sector. So I had an unpaid internship, luckily, with the Arizona Department of Education, but it's because I put myself out there and asked for it. So I think don't be afraid to invite students to help solve problems too.
Well, on that note, thank you to our panelists.